Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kira Zeidelman. I'm a senior manager in NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation. And I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar on behalf of the co-chairs of the Nuclear Energy Partnership, Commissioner Anthony O'Donnell from Maryland and Commissioner Tim Echols from Georgia. Now I'd like to pass things over to Commissioner Echols, who will moderate today's webinar. Commissioner.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining our second DOE NARUC Nuclear Energy Partnership webinar. As a co-chair of the partnership along with Tony O'Donnell, I am pleased to welcome everyone to this discussion today on advanced nuclear. Today's webinar will be recorded with the recording and slides posted on NARUC's website and emailed to the attendees next week. In March of this year, NARUC formally launched the 5-year Nuclear Energy Partnership with support from the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy, welcoming commissioners and commission staff representing 20 states and territories as formal partnership members, and we hope that's going to grow. Through this educational initiative, NARUC provides opportunities for state public service commissioners and commission staff to better understand barriers and possibilities related to the U.S. nuclear fleet, the nation's largest source of zero carbon power. We thank the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy for their support, and we look forward to working with the organizations represented today. The Idaho National Lab, ClearPath, Pillsbury Law, as well as other experts engaged in nuclear research, policy, and regulation to share their perspectives over the course of this partnership. I'm going to introduce our first speaker today, a friend. We've traveled the world together, Jeffrey Merrifield, the Honorable Jeff Merrifield, a former presidential appointee to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is widely recognized as an international thought leader on nuclear power and the deployment of complex energy systems for the avoidance of carbon generation. Over his 3 decades of work on energy issues, including almost 9 years as an NRC commissioner, Jeff has developed wide-ranging relationships throughout the international nuclear community that allow him to identify strategic and legal solutions. He is a lawyer from Georgetown for major energy and environmental matters. He's considered a leader in advanced nuclear deployment and has assisted large and developing nuclear utility suppliers and governments in effectively meeting their regulatory requirements and strategic objectives regarding the deployment of complex energy systems. And I'll say this, that when Air France lost my luggage going to the World Nuclear Expedition, he loaned me a shirt and a suit. So I was very grateful for that until we found my luggage. So take it away, Jeff Merrifield.
My friend, Commissioner Echols, thank you very much for that introduction. Jasmine, we'll go to the first slide. The Commissioner has already touched on a lot of this. You'll get these in this slide, so I won't go through the advertisements. 2 points I make on this slide. Number one, I represent Pillsbury. We're the oldest and largest nuclear law practice in the world. And 2, as a former NRC commissioner, I'm honored to have formerly been an honorary member of NARUC and glad we can continue that tradition. Next slide. I'm not going to go over this except is to underline a point which many of you are already very familiar with, and that is there's lots of companies out there, particularly utilities, that have made a commitment to be 80 to 100% carbon free by 2050. That's a tall order, and it's going to require all options, all carbon free options to make that happen. And today we're going to talk about one of those, advanced nuclear. Next. When we talk about these reactors, these are both light these are both light water and non-light water reactors. As you know, our current fleet is made up of 100% light water reactors, the 96 that are currently operating. There are some which are called small modular reactors, which are typically referred to as smaller light water reactors, and there are several technologies out there right now. They fall into a range of categories: micro reactors, 10 megawatts or less. What I would say are small scale between 10 and 300 megawatts, medium scale 300 to 700, and large scale reactors greater than 700. The technologies you're going to be hearing more about are relative to high temperature gas reactors, which use something such as helium as a heat carrier, liquid metal cooled, sometimes this would be lead cooled reactors. Fast reactors is another term used for them. And then molten salt reactors, which use a pool of liquid salt and uranium in their core for power production. These are all technologies originally developed by DOE and its predecessor, the Atomic Energy Commission, back in the 1950s. So while they are new to us, they're not new, and there's actually a lot of fairly good history with those. Next slide. Listed here, and I want to preface this, these aren't all of the advanced reactors that are out there, but these are some that are making more news. New Scale Reactor have received significant funding from DOE. That is based on a light water reactor design. They are proposing to deploy that at the UAMP site in Idaho. GE has a modernized version of a traditional design. It's 300 megawatts, intended to be located underground. It is one of 3 designs selected for by Ontario Power Generation for potential selection at the Darlington site up in Ontario. They also have received, expect to receive additional support down the line from DOE. The X-Energy XE100 is a design based out of Rockville, Maryland. It is based on what is called a pebble bed reactor. They use a cue ball sized fuel assembly made out of trisol particles. Those were originally developed in the US, subsequently deployed in Germany, Japan, South Africa tried to establish that program. X-Energy has a 50 megawatt reactor that will be installed in sequence. Multiple reactors could be installed at one site. They were one of 2 award recipients for $80 million in first-year funding by DOE. They intend to deploy that reactor at the Energy Northwest site in Richland, Washington. They are also the second of the 3 companies selected by Ontario Power Generation for potential deployment. Terrestrial Energy is a molten salt reactor, 195 megawatts. This was the 3rd of the 3 technologies selected by Ontario Power Generation. They are also the subject of a pilot project between the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to demonstrate the ability to license reactors in both countries. They've initiated initial pilot efforts. That is promising. We'll see how that goes. In the news this week, Terrapower's Natrium reactor, that is a sodium fast reactor paired with a molten salt storage. They are partnered with GE in that particular part of the effort. They were the second of 2 awardees under the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program by DOE. And there was an announcement this week that they intend to place that particular design at a to-be-selected coal power plant site in Wyoming that would be used for repowering. Rounding this out, Oklo Aurora, it's a 1.5 megawatt fast reactor. They have what was the first combined construction and operation license in front of the NRC that is being reviewed right now. That would be used principally at remote locations. Kairos Power, based in Alameda, California, is a 140 megawatt pebble bed reactor, but it uses molten salt as the coolant rather than most pebble beds using helium. They were awarded a $30 million risk reduction award by DOE, as was the Westinghouse eVinci very small reactor design, which also received a risk reward reduction. So these are among the more noteworthy ones in the news, but there's certainly literally dozens of others which are potentially under development. Jasmine, next slide, please. So what are the advantages of these? Well, obviously smaller size makes them easier to deploy, easier to construct in a factory-like setting, and easier to modularize. They do have the advantages of having a reduced risk. They are obviously emission-free generation. And most importantly, and I won't describe this slide because you all know what that is, they have load following capabilities that are currently not present in the existing large light water reactor fleet. So meeting that timeline in the late summer evening through 9 o'clock at night is one of the areas where they can certainly help them meet that ramping load. Next slide. I think one of the things which is becoming increasingly clear in Washington, D.C. is that we aren't going to be able to get to decarbonization without more nuclear. This will require electrification of transportation and other energy intensive industries. It certainly will result in shifting of the demand curve, but it is with the intention of relying on a technology which has demonstrated that it can operate 24/7. And I would note for the record, last year, the U.S. nuclear fleet had an operating capacity factor of 95%, which is no one's coming close to that. I list a number of these organizations on here because clearly the atmospherics in Washington have changed as we see more and more organizations recognizing that nuclear does need to be part of this decarbonization mix. Next slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is just really to illustrate that the variance, there's a lot of discussions about the cost differences between nuclear and other forms of generation. And I don't mean this is an attack on wind and solar. I actually believe they're both critically important for meeting decarbonization needs. But when you compare an 80-year lifetime against renewables, wind or solar, you can't just think about the overnight cost on the first installation. You really need to be doing a side-by-side comparison of the multiple kit that will need to be required, not only in the horizontal axis where you have to, because you can't rely on wind and solar 24/7, you've got to have that backup, whether it's natural gas or bulk storage, or as you think, the lifetime of wind and solar assets are typically in the 20 to 25-year lifetime. So in making that comparison, you might have to have 4 sets of solar units to be equivalent to 1 nuclear unit being installed. So I think as decision makers, it's important to remember those policy differences. Next slide, please. Some of the key advantages, and you can certainly review this later on in the slides, 24/7, a target of overnight costs between $2,250 and $3,500. That's the target for nth of a kind. They do bring within the potential for a simplified regulatory structure. We're working with the NRC on that right now. They've got some unique resilience benefits, which I'd be happy to discuss at a later point. But the greater flexibility of the deployment of these designs means repowering of fossil fuel sites, use for process heat in applications where they are not now used, water desalination, and certainly with the smaller microreactors, critical service applications in very remote areas like Alaska. Next slide. I'm not going to go over all the details of this slide. It's really meant to illustrate the significant support both by the Trump administration and the Biden administration. And I would note in the announcement of the budget back earlier this week, the Biden administration is proposing to increase the DOE nuclear energy budget from $1.5 billion to $1.86 billion. That's a significant increase and shows that demonstration. Additionally, Congress has clearly shown through a variety of actions it too is supportive of advanced nuclear, including giving the NRC additional resources, making resources available for things like the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, among others, and certainly some changes in export requirements relative to these designs. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of the 5-year authorizations that have been given for various advanced nuclear projects. We could spend some time going over each one of them or not. I'm just listing them here so we have some sense of the breadth of the billions of dollars that our government has put on the table for the potential of getting these reactor designs moving forward. Next slide. So in summary, I think advanced nuclear really has become a strong bipartisan and bicameral issue. Washington recognizes that in order for us to meet our global carbon reduction targets, we're going to need to have nuclear as an integral part of the mix. We are very pleased that the President, Secretary Granholm, and Secretary Perry, who is the lead international negotiator on climate change, have all endorsed advanced nuclear to fight this issue. I would note, having been in and out of DC since 1986, it is a big change that environmental groups are becoming more supportive. Carbon reduction is the key and also provides opportunities for exports and to counter China. And I would note, as I said before, a lot of opportunities for interaction with Canada, which we think are very favorable. So with that, happy to answer questions later. Commissioner, thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. And we do have a helium question for you we'll get to in the Q&A, and then I've got some questions as well. Let's now go to Christine King. She's the director of the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation and Nuclear Initiative, where she leads efforts on behalf of the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy to provide the nuclear community with access to the technical, regulatory, and financial support necessary to move innovative nuclear energy technologies towards commercialization. Christine has over 26 years of experience in the industry, including a history of leading strategic initiatives with multi-million-dollar budgets, fostering relationships and expanding programs. Christine, take it away.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're very happy to be here. I'm happy for this partnership between the DOE and NARUC. I'll talk a little bit about the GAIN initiative. And today, I think much of what we talk about might feel a little bit like skipping a stone across the surface of many different technologies and business models and demonstration projects. My hope for this group is that this is just the first of many conversations that you continue to have through this partnership. So the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear is an initiative from the DOE headquarters. So while I'm homed at Idaho National Laboratory, our group represents and works on behalf of all of the national laboratories. And our focus really is every day getting up to understand the needs of private industry and how we can help deploy the national assets, whether that's our scientists or our facilities or direct funding, to help move their projects forward. And I'll talk a little bit later about how that public-private partnership is changing over time to match the needs of the industry and to ensure commercialization. So again, thank you very much for being here. Let's dive in a little bit. So next slide, please. So recently, we produced what's called the GAIN Energy Calculator. And what I like about this is if you've started to look within your own state about what it might take to decarbonize, and you've picked up a modeling report either from a private consulting company or a national lab or a research organization, they're typically 250 pages and pretty dense. What we were trying to do was to create an approachable way that you could do the math for yourself. The energy calculator is available on the GAIN website. What I have here is an example that we did in recent testimony in Chicago. The purpose of the GAIN energy calculator, it allows you to change items on the demand side and set your carbon reduction goals. And then you have the ability to meet that demand with different generation sources. And you get immediate feedback in various areas. You get immediate feedback in the picture to see what happens, like if you decide to electrify transportation, you see more electric cars on the road, you see a charging station show up in your house. So again, it's a little more intuitive to maybe start to get your head around the magnitude of the challenge associated with decarbonization. What I've captured here on the left-hand side is really when we were looking, and we did calculate it based on land mass of Chicago's. That was just because we were talking to Illinois and we thought that would be fun for them. But is really looking at when you build out with renewables and that impact on land mass and the amount of land resource available. The calculator will also help you look at fuel security, the impact on clean air. GAIN will be hosting over the summer some drop-in sessions. If you're interested in coming into those sessions, we will share the announcement of that with Kira and Jasmine. Next slide, please. Jeff covered this quite well. What I want to say is, in particular about this slide, is this is not, if you're familiar with the existing fleet, you may only be familiar with the large light water reactor. Going forward, advanced nuclear is going to offer not only a variety of capabilities, but a variety of sizes. And I think the presentation from Dr. Bragg later will go into more of these details. I will tell you the terminology can be a bit confusing. So, you need to kind of distinguish between features like mobility and modularity, which might be more tuned to what an end user wants. Mobility from a perspective of deploying maybe in a remote location to improve resilience of that community, or modularity to impact cost where we're building them in factories. Size typically is associated with the power output on the back end. And reactor type, we normally are referencing the coolant, as Jeff was talking about earlier, the coolant used for the plant. You'll hear a high temperature gas cooled reactor. A light water reactor is a water cooled reactor. So just to give you a little bit of a tour of those types of terms, and we do recognize that it can be a bit confusing, but the more time you spend with it, the more it'll make sense. Let's go to the next slide. The exciting thing is there are many states and regions that have already started to look at decarbonization strategies and looking at different generation sources and how they might meet those particular goals. What I have here is, this is a publicly available report from Pacific Northwest, where they were looking, they have a statewide goal of 100% carbon free by 2045. And what this shows is, if you look on the far left column, what the build out would need to be to meet that goal with 100% renewable energy. The overbuild is associated with the intermittency and the variability of wind and solar, along with the seasonality associated with that. What they did in the middle column there was look at the extension of the nuclear asset they own, Columbia Generating Station. And you can see that just in keeping Columbia Generating Station running for 80 years, the impact of the build as well. And then the last column shows the addition of a small modular reactor and how that can help you truly optimize not only and give you diversity across your portfolio and that clean, firm power that you're looking for, but also potentially give you the lowest cost across the board as well. There are other studies that are either being completed or have been completed. For example, Alaska is looking at different scenarios as well. And I would imagine more information is going to come forward given the recent announcement from Wyoming of why they were, what led them to the decision they made with the Natrium reactor. Next slide. So just to talk, so there is a companion program. I would call NRIC my partner. So GAIN and NRIC are very similarly formed. We are initiatives and programs directly from the Department of Energy at headquarters. And every day we're focused on how we commercialize these new technologies. The difference is that NRIC is hyper-focused on the demonstration phase of this. So all the work that we're doing in the next decade associated with demonstrating these technologies such that we can move forward to beyond first of a kind build into nth of a kind builds. Next slide, please. Both GAIN and NRIC and other programs have different vehicles associated available for the public-private partnership. What I want to talk about here is really showing how these funding vehicles are changing over time. The nuclear energy vouchers are managed by the GAIN team. These are small targeted vouchers that allows you to essentially hire the national labs to execute a scope of work on your behalf. Why is this important? This allows companies to use our resources instead of having to build them for themselves. It's been a highly successful program. We have it since 2016, we've issued 60 vouchers and completed 30. The industry funding opportunity announcement 1817 is an open funding opportunity. And what you start to see here is the support across doing a first of a kind demonstration and focus and for larger projects, longer period of time, but there's also an increase in the cost share expected from private industry. Advanced reactor development, this might be focused on a particular technology. Again, ramping up from where we are with vouchers into larger and longer projects. The Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, though, that Jeff talked about, that was announced in the fall of 2020, what this did was really put an endpoint on delivery. So instead of having large projects that last 3 years, this was a statement that we will have 2 advanced reactors demonstrated within 5 to 7 years. We will work on the next group of reactors in helping de-risk them so that they're ready for demonstration within 10 to 14 years. Again, you see the cost share associated with that. And on the bottom, you can see how the public-private partnership has been growing over time. And you also can see that we're starting to reach a little bit of parity. Next slide. This gives you an idea of some of the projects that are underway, not just the ARDP projects, but also the versatile test reactor, the microreactor program. And I hope that in future webinars that you guys will have the opportunity to dig into some of those projects as well. Next slide. The next few slides I'm going to leave here for your information. This is a summary of all the projects under the ARDP. Next slide, Jasmine. But I also want to point out that there's other projects that are going on specifically with the support of NREC that don't fall under the ARDP program as well that are interesting. Next slide. Specifically, NREC is focusing on the things that will make our projects ultimately better for commercialization by addressing some of the cost issues that have challenged us in the current fleet builds that are going on. And that's all I have. Thank you, Commissioner.
Fantastic. And we're getting more questions. Let me encourage you to place any questions you have in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to each one of them. At the end, we're going to go to Nico McMurray, and he is the Nuclear Program Director at ClearPath. I've been to your offices in North Carolina. Thank you for the great work that you guys are doing, Nico. Prior to joining ClearPath, Nico was a materials engineer at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, focusing on new and advanced nuclear reactors. Take it away, Nico.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner. First, I want to thank NARUC for the invitation today. I think it's really important for understanding these new technologies at the state level and really how they can be used in different ways. So as Commissioner mentioned, my name is Nico McMurray. I'm the Program Director for Nuclear Energy at ClearPath. And before diving in, I want to give a brief overview of ClearPath as I think it'll help frame the discussion. So ClearPath was founded in 2013 by North Carolina businessmen, 18 staff, primarily in DC, although we do have a couple staff in Charlotte as well. And we really focus on policies to support clean energy and industrial decarbonization. Jasmine, if you could hop to the next slide, please. And so you can see really what we're focusing on is nuclear, energy storage, natural gas, carbon capture, hydrogeo, thermal, but also industrial, such as concrete, metals, and hydrogen. And we're really looking at this from the entire life cycle. So what is the basic R&D all the way through, demonstrating what are those deployment incentives, and then what is everything around there, like the ecosystem for kind of that regulatory reform. In order to do this, we work on legislative topics, regulatory, export, and as well as technical. And we work very closely with federal policymakers on different initiatives, for example, nuclear energy, that align with our priorities to help, again, commercialize these technologies. I do want to emphasize we don't take money from industry, which really gives us the flexibility to focus on these policies that can support their commercialization. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're looking at this technology for the entire life cycle. So similar to what was on the previous slide, and it's important, I think, that we heard a lot about these specific technologies. We heard a lot about the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program from Jeff and Christine. And I want to emphasize some of these other projects and programs that are happening to support the commercialization. We do actively work on and support the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, as well as that large list of federal programs that Jeff listed on one of his slides. But based on our position, we are able to focus looking at this broader projects. So looking at the S-curve, you can see that, that basic R&D, what Christine mentioned, some of the things like vouchers and funding opportunity announcements, and then, the early public-private partnerships that Christine also mentioned. And then again, what are some of these more targeted incentives to pull? So things like tax credits. Recently, the Energy Sector Innovation Credit that was introduced by Senators Crapo and Whitehouse, looking to really support these first-of-a-kind technologies that have a very small market penetration. And then as these are ramping up and you're proving them out through other programs like the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, how are you supporting their commercialization? So looking at the export requirements, how can the US be a leader in exporting some of these low carbon technologies abroad? So next slide, please. And so did briefly mention the Energy Act of 2020, very large energy bill, first in decades, that really supported a whole lot of demonstration projects. Talked about the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, but also several others in different technologies. But there was a lot of other pieces in here that can support this next generation of nuclear. There's a specific program for the fuel to make sure the fuel is available for these programs. Integrated energy systems and hydrogen, which Shannon will talk about later. How to support the loan program office and loan guarantees, so the government can, again, have a different mechanism to support these first-of-a-kind technologies. And then just broader topics related to additional research and demonstration to really, again, help make sure that these innovators that Jeff mentioned can really access the Department of Energy and the national labs in order to get towards commercialization. And what's really important is how bipartisan the support is. Jeff mentioned this, but this bill was very bipartisan in support. I think that is extremely important to emphasize. The Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program was actually started in FY20 through the appropriations process, and then which was also bipartisan. And then the Energy Act here was also, which solidified and actually authorized that program. And previous administration very supportive of nuclear. Current administration also very supportive of nuclear. The DNC changed their platform to support nuclear for the first time. There's been a lot of discussions for support for existing fleet, recognizing the jobs and the carbon attributes of that. And as well as on the Republican side, the McCarthy energy package also had a lot of provisions supporting nuclear. So there's a lot of consensus, a lot of bipartisan consensus that nuclear energy is important and has a role to play. Next slide, please. So as the commissioner mentioned, I was a materials engineer at the NRC, and while I was focusing on a lot of technical topics, I was also focused on some of the regulatory topics for how can the NRC review this next generation of technology. So I want to take a couple minutes to talk about this because it's great, we're supporting the technologies, we're demonstrating them, but there still has to be a way to commercialize them. And one of those steps is going through the regulatory process. And so, as was discussed, these next generation technologies are different than the current operating reactors. They come in different sizes, they use different fuels, they use different coolants, they justify safety in different ways. And the NRC was directed through the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, or NEMA, to modernize its requirements for these designs. And so there are a lot of efforts. A lot of them are very interconnected, which for those who are not following it as closely, it can be a little overwhelming and confusing. But it's really important to emphasize how all of these will fit together in order to ensure that these next generation of technologies can come online. There is not undue regulatory burden, and it can give that flexibility on different sightings. So they can be used for hydrogen production or heat generation. So a couple of these quick topics. Part 53, a new regulatory framework. So the existing regulatory frameworks for the operating plants, very light water focused. So very prescriptive requirements, how many operators, how many sources of backup power. This new regulatory framework is designed to accommodate these different technologies that justify safety in different ways. Emergency planning, it's an ongoing process right now, but because of these reactors, due to having smaller sizes in different ways that they justify safety, how can you site them closer or in different locations, such as a coal facility that might be closer to a population center than traditional reactors are sited. Other advanced reactor GEIS, which is generic environmental impact statement. So looking at the environmental side, how can you treat some of these topics from the environmental review generically to help accelerate that deployment? And then just broader environmental topics, again, how to accelerate the rulemaking or how to accelerate the process to commercialize these technologies. Next slide, please. And so I don't want to go into too many details on my last two slides because a lot of these programs were covered, but I think it's really important to understand there are some significant projects at the DOE through the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, through either the demonstrations and the risk reductions, and it really is all over the country. So you can see a lot of the different companies that won some of these awards through the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project, including some of the commercial projects, the Versatile Test Reactor, which will likely be at Idaho National Lab, and then even the Department of Defense, which has an interest in advanced nuclear technologies. And you can see where a lot of these companies are headquarters, as well as you can see where their projects are planned on being sited. And the slide is already out of date as of Wednesday, with Terrapower announcing that they will build their Natrium reactor in Wyoming. So this will have to be updated. But just really want to emphasize all over the country, there's an interest in nuclear, which is part of its bipartisan support. You have a lot of different senators and House representatives who are really interested in this technology, and a lot of different, again, utilities who see nuclear as a key role to support their decarbonization. Next slide, please. And the last slide, just again, real quick, wanted to show some of the timeline for these projects. So how, you have Vogtle and Southern Company coming online, NuScale, Oklo, some other commercial projects, some of these advanced reactors through the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program with Terrapower and X-Energy. So these projects are real and they have timelines, many of which are congressionally driven. So really trying to put together that aggressive team for, say, Terrapower and X-Energy to come online. So just wanted to show some of those visuals because I think it's important to understand the broader landscape. And I look forward to questions later. Turn it back over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Nico. And that slide that you showed with all of those developments all over the country, I think that's very encouraging, because we do need this broad support for the technology to move forward. It can't be just a little Vogtle like we're building in Georgia. That's not going to move states like California, where I'm sitting right now as I'm out here looking at their sustainability stuff here in LA, EV chargers, electric bus stuff. It's got to be broad. So thank you for that. That's fantastic. Let's go to our last speaker. Dr. Shannon Bragg is the Idaho National Lab lead for integrated energy systems in the Nuclear Science and Technologies Directorate. In this role, Shannon leads research in the innovative application of nuclear energy alongside other clean energy generators seeking to maximize energy utilization, generator profitability, which obviously is important in the deregulated markets, and grid reliability and resilience through systems integration. And you just heard Nico mention that the Idaho lab has the NuScale project going there. She currently serves as the co-director for the INL Laboratory Initiative at Idaho National Lab Initiative on Integrated Energy Systems, and a National Technical Director for the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy Integrated Energy Systems Program. Say that 3 times. Prior to her current position, Shannon has led multiple leadership roles in the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy Program since joining Idaho National Lab in 2010, including program leadership for space nuclear power and propulsion system, advanced nuclear fuels, and micro-reactor development. She's got a PhD and an MS in nuclear engineering from the University of Michigan, an MS in medical physics from the University of Texas in Houston, and a BS in nuclear engineering from Texas A&M University. She's a smart lady. Dr. Bragg, looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for that introduction and for the opportunity to join this discussion today. I really would like to just build on what my colleagues have discussed to talk about how our advanced nuclear energy systems can really serve more than just our electricity demands as we go forward. So next slide, please. Currently, if we look at our energy systems, our electricity generators primarily work independently, and they meet grid demand. They're managed by grid operators, and they work to meet the needs of day ahead, hour ahead, 5-minute markets, et cetera. But our energy demands, of course, are not just electricity, and they also come in the areas of industry and transportation. And as we globally seek to reduce our environmental impacts and CO2 emissions, we will need to use nuclear plants across a range of sizes and types, as has been discussed. And we will also need the other resources, such as renewables and fossil fuels with carbon capture, to meet the growing demands for electricity, heat for industrial applications, as well as mobility. And by looking at this holistically, we truly can begin to maximize energy utilization and generator profitability that you mentioned, as well as minimizing environmental impacts, all while maintaining our affordability, as well as grid reliability and resilience. So on the next slide, I'd like to highlight that the role for nuclear energy truly is shifting. Our operational paradigms are changing as our grid is evolving. Currently, our nuclear plants provide clean baseload electricity for the grid. As generation from variable renewables increases, and we see historically low-cost natural gas, we do see that these traditionally baseload plants are being called upon to operate flexibly, reducing power output when that grid net demand is low. So that's what we mean by this operational flexibility. And there are decades of experience of nuclear plants operating in this mode in France and Germany, more recently in the US. And it's technically viable and quite achievable, but economically, it's not really the best answer. The primary output from a nuclear plant is heat. So rather than reducing power to accommodate to changing electricity demands, what we'd like to do is move that heat or excess electricity for other uses. It can either be stored for use later, or it could be directed to meet other energy demands. And that's what you see in this center section where I refer to product flexibility, where we see that these plants can begin to support the production of clean water for agriculture or household or industrial use, or to produce hydrogen that can be used in a number of end uses, and we'll talk a little more about that. Or it can be sent to industrial plants that might currently burn fossil fuels to derive the heat needed to drive their processes. So we can see that nuclear plants can really begin to support broad decarbonization goals, as well as revitalization of communities by reinvigorating some of these domestic manufacturing sectors with clean, reliable, available energy. And as you've heard from my colleagues, these newer innovative systems are coming in a variety of sizes, and these can be deployed at a variety of scales from just a few megawatts up to 1,000 megawatts for a single unit. So the design of these advanced nuclear plants really allows for greater flexibility than our current fleet, and these small systems can support deployment in a variety of locations in a distributed rather than a centralized fashion, such that they can provide a true direct complement to renewable installations. And these small footprint plants can now be sited very close to their end use. And this could be at a refinery or a steel manufacturing facility or a chemical plant, just as a few examples. On the next slide, I'd like to take just a moment to focus a little bit on hydrogen, which gets a lot of attention these days. Hydrogen is a highly versatile energy carrier that can support a number of downstream applications, which is why it is so much of interest. Just for some examples, that hydrogen could be used to produce electricity at a later time when it is needed via fuel cells or combustion in natural gas turbines, or it could be used in fuel cell vehicles to support transportation needs, such that the only byproduct in burning that hydrogen is now water vapor. You can also use it in ammonia and fertilizer production to meet agricultural demands, or synfuels for transportation. And in those, what we do is basically capture carbon dioxide and use that carbon alongside that hydrogen to produce those fuels, and essentially giving us the opportunity to burn that carbon twice to dramatically reduce environmental releases. We can also use that in petroleum refineries, as you see in this example here, or metals refining, or as feedstock in a number of chemical processes. So what you see in this slide here is just an example as to how we might vary the dispatch of energy from a nuclear plant as a function of electricity price. And I've just selected a quick example here to show how the production of hydrogen can be varied, and that hydrogen can be stored as the plant is alternately producing hydrogen or electricity for the grid. And by using storage alongside this, we can now provide a constant supply of hydrogen to those coupled end users. So currently, hydrogen is mostly produced by steam methane reforming, breaking down natural gas and producing CO2 as a byproduct. But when we use electrolysis processes to break down water molecules to produce hydrogen and the byproduct oxygen, which can also, of course, be used, we now have what we might refer to as clean or green hydrogen, and we see the markets for this growing dramatically around the world. So on the next slide, you'll see some examples as to how these innovative plant designs are really moving from concept paper studies to reality. So I've highlighted here a couple of projects that are ongoing in the US at commercial nuclear facilities. These projects initiated with detailed analyses and partnership between the national laboratories and these current plant owners and operators to evaluate the technical and the economic potential of producing hydrogen using excess energy at these plants. On the left, you'll see the first of these projects that will come online, and that is at an Exelon nuclear plant in the Midwest. And in this case, we'll be producing hydrogen on site for the nearby hydrogen markets, and we expect to see that go online later this year. On the right, you'll see a project that is supported by a consortium of 3 utilities, where the first phase of that consortium project will demonstrate hydrogen production at the Davis-Besse plant in Ohio that is operated by Energy Harbor. This will also use that hydrogen for those nearby industries, initially starting with some of the transportation industry and mobility with heavy-duty trucks and forklifts. Both of these projects are using low temperature electrolysis, which uses electricity to break down water molecules and provides that electric interconnection with the plants behind the grid interconnect. And the project on the right expects to commence testing next year in 2022. On the next slide, you see the third demonstration project that has been funded, and this will demonstrate high temperature electrolysis or steam electrolysis at an Xcel Energy plant. What this allows us to do is utilize some of that thermal energy from the nuclear plant to drive up the temperature at which we break down those molecules, and this gives us much higher efficiency and therefore better economics overall. We also expect this project to be underway and demonstrating this production by 2022. Next slide, please. So before I get into this one real quickly, I neglected to point out that although these projects that I've described utilize current fleet plants, start fairly small scale, these give us the path forward for advanced reactors. What we learn in these initial demonstrations will give us the right information and the right tool set to really understand how we bring these concepts and the production of non-electric products to our advanced reactor deployments from day one, so that they aren't deployed solely for electricity, but also for these alternative products. And this slide that I've shown here shows that hydrogen really is just a starting point. We are looking at hydrogen and taking a strong focus on hydrogen because it does open so many opportunities. but we're looking to many other opportunities as well. This slide illustrates another opportunity to use that clean nuclear heat, which is high quality, high temperature, in particular when we utilize advanced reactors to support utilization of captured CO2 from operating facilities or directly from the air to make synthetic liquid fuels, or using other carbon resources such as coal and biomass, which can then be upgraded to higher value consumer products such as chemicals, carbon fibers, or polymers. We all know that there are many regions of our country that currently rely on fossil fuels for their economic well-being. And the potential phase out, and I think probable phase out of fossil fuels for electricity, really has them wondering what the future might hold for these communities. So the work that we do in this integrated energy system program and working with our partner laboratories around the DOE complex really proposes to look at these carbon resources differently. Instead of looking at those for electricity, we begin to look at those as feedstock for those consumer products. And in this fashion, we can think about ways to maintain and then even grow these communities by producing higher value products from those resources that they mine from their regions. And of course, it's been mentioned in the previous presentations, we're really excited to see this announcement from Terrapower that they plan to site their first Natrium reactor at a retiring coal plant site in Wyoming. This really does begin that process of environmental and social justice and revitalizing these communities that are at risk as we transition our energy system. So this is a pretty exciting opportunity that can take some of these concepts to reality. So next slide, please. And this is my last slide. I just want to encourage you that as we consider both our current energy systems and how we transition those into our future energy systems, that we begin to think more broadly than our current experience about how each of these resources might support our growing energy demands and truly begin to shift our paradigm as will be necessary to meet our climate goals. So I encourage you to reach out with questions on these various ideas and these potential roles for nuclear, and would love to engage you in discussion if you'd like to know more. Thank you so much for the time, and back to you, Commissioner.
Thank you. We've got about 8 minutes before we end. So panelists will pull you up and bring them all on the screen if we can. I want to start with you, Dr. Bragg Sitton. Do you think that green hydrogen production is a gateway, call it a gateway drug to nuclear energy for states that maybe had been squeamish about nuclear energy before for whatever reason? Can they justify building advanced nuclear to get the green hydrogen and to make their state carbon free in the process?
I do think it's a real opportunity, and the viability of these combined options will look different as we look to different locations around the world or around the US. But when we start to look at these advanced nuclear systems at the right scale for the deployment, just as an example, the right scale for that particular region, and we begin to look at these alternative products, it changes the business plan. It changes the opportunity. It changes how they might benefit from that. When we begin to look at how this clean, reliable plant that provides such energy dense products can support not just electricity, but agriculture and industry, we begin to see greater opportunities. So I do think that there are greater business potentials for some of those nuclear newcomer countries or regions when we think about more holistic solutions like this.
Yeah, so to go with Christine's alma mater, you kind of create a wolf pack, right? You create a wolf pack of supporting constituencies that are all benefiting from the technology. Christine, let me ask you, how important is President Biden's support of nuclear energy, advanced nuclear, as we're talking about today, in kind of getting the wolf pack organized and moving towards this nuclear future?
Well, I think what is important about the support that we're seeing currently, it's about a focus on ensuring that we're doing the right things today and that we're building that infrastructure and that we're re-envisioning what our energy could be on a holistic basis, because I think that's where the transformation is. and more importantly, making sure that the government does their part in those projects to get them ready for private investment. It is important that the government steps forward and pushes these technologies as close as we can to the communities, and that we're not asking for that premature investment.
Yeah, and she's
Commissioner?
she's an NC State person. Yes, Jeff, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, just on those last two questions, in terms of other states looking at advanced nuclear, I think the hydrogen production element is a really important one for every state. Some of the studies that we've looked at, somewhere between 18 and 25% of the natural gas used in people's homes or for other heat-related purposes could potentially be displaced by hydrogen. So that can impact literally every state in the country. On the dynamic with the administration, I think the point that certainly I and Nico underscored as well, this is a broad bipartisan group of folks in many states. It includes both our last president and our current one. In contrast to when I got to DC, there weren't a whole lot of nuclear supporters. The legislation that has gone through in Congress supporting nuclear has been wide bipartisan majorities. This is really a huge amount of support across the board.
Yeah, Nico, let me ask you, as you think about time frame, it seems like people don't have the patience much anymore. They want things very quickly, and some of these projects take a long time. Just look at Vogtle in my own state. I mean, what's the expected time frame for the decision on NuScale's rulemaking and design approval? And do you think people in our country have the patience for this?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you have to look at this as what is the big picture. So these are going to be assets that are going to operate for decades in their communities, and so these projects like NuScale or the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program and subsequent builds, they're going to be operating for decades. And so taking that long view is really important of what these are trying to accomplish. And if we're looking at programs like the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, it has a clear timeline for coming online by 2027. And so if you're a community, you can follow that project, see how it's going, and then make decisions based on how it's going. So that's, I think, where the nuclear industry, having these clear timelines, these clear goals, these clear milestones, can help communities make these decisions for building and hosting new nuclear.
Yeah, just a couple.
Yeah, I would just add,
lightning round, Jeff. Lightning, go. Be quick. Go ahead.
If we had these reactor designs licensed and a couple of them built, we could sell a lot of them right now. The frustration is we got a little bit more time, but they're promising and they're coming fast.
Yeah, so let me ask you, Dr. Bragg-Sitton, a question about PhD programs on PhDs with advanced nuclear reactors. Do you anticipate schools like Texas A&M and Georgia Tech and MIT and others to move in that direction with PhD programs?
They're already there. These faculty in each of these programs work with us on research projects. I have many of those universities engaged in active research that are a part of my program, part of other programs that are around the DOE NE complex as well. So absolutely, they're already doing this. The graduate students are getting engaged in research that is being applied right now. So there's really great opportunities for those students.
It was mentioned about the Wyoming announcement, and I had met with our unions, I guess about a month ago, and they asked me, this is a room full of union leaders, IBEW, sheet metal, everybody working on Vogtle. They brought it up and said, hey, what about the 7,000 acres that Southern Company, Georgia Power bought on the other side of the state? As you close coal plants, can you just build one of these advanced reactors so that our workforce can transition? So to your point, Dr. Bragg-Sitton, that is exactly what the union is asking. And we have had a fantastic experience with our union workforce in the state of Georgia. Well, I wish we could just keep talking all day about this, but we can't. So I want to close this out by thanking Dr. Bragg-Sitton. I want to thank Christine, for Nico, for Jeff Merrifield for their time, and the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy for supporting this webinar. Partnership members can join a quarterly partnership call next Friday June 11th at 2 p.m. And continue to have this dialogue. The brief members only call will be an opportunity to share feedback with NARUC staff and fellow partnership members on the partnership's activities over the past few months, as well as comments on how upcoming partnership activities can align with your state's challenges and interest in nuclear power. And Jasmine has already distributed call information to those on the NEP email list. So check NARUC's website for information on other upcoming activities, and please reach out to Kira and Jasmine at NARUC with any questions or feedback. And I'm going to just end it by saying, look, I'm here in California now because California is ahead of us in Georgia on electric buses and electric vehicles and charging systems and the way that they've done it. I'm here and I'm learning from them. And I know NARUC provides this collaborative environment. We want to learn from each other, encourage each other, because the nuances of the geography, the politics, all of those things make a difference in how we do our job. So just a shout out to my co-chair, Anthony O'Donnell, and all of my NARUC colleagues for the great work that you do in serving your states. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.